Hi, welcome to Rock and Metal Invasion. My name is Steve. Coming up on the show today, I'm doing FM Records, HM Records, HM Records America, they all live under Revolver Records. That's the parent company. So basically, a little bit like what I did with the Music for Nations label, I'm going to go through and show you records I have in my collection that are from the Revolver Records label. And under that label sits FM Records and HM Records, or Heavy Metal Records. So this label is a little bit like Music for Nations, the one I've done previously, a UK based, and perhaps not quite as big, but they did release quite a bit in the 80s. Initially, actually, they started off with the new wave of British heavy metal bands. So their very first release was something called Heavy Metal Heroes, and it came out around 1981. And it featured a lot of the new wave of British heavy metal bands that were coming out at the time. It had Witchfinder General on it. It even had Grim Reaper on it, Jaguar. I don't have a physical copy of it, but quite a well-known compilation. And that really got, I guess, the label going. I do have Heavy Metal Heroes number 2. So here it is here. And it basically, on the back, there's a little... some information about how successful the first one had been, and this is sort of a continuation. Now, this label was started by a guy called Paul Birch, and in fact, he's still the label's still going. I assume he has something still to do with it, as Revolver Music or Revolver Records. But back in the 80s, it was sort of more promoted as HM Records or Heavy Metal Records. And there's also American part of it as well. So sometimes it would say Heavy Metal Records America. And then you also had FM Records. I'm not sure how they differentiated between if you were on HM Records or FM Records. It just depended on what label the band signed with. The sound-wise, actually not that much different. You might have thought, the HM Records is going to be heavier. But although it's called Heavy Metal Records, a lot of the bands weren't that heavy. I guess initially it did start with that new wave of British heavy metal, but as they go in through the 80s, a lot of the bands that are actually on the Heavy Metal Records label wouldn't probably even be called heavy metal now, but weren't even that heavy back at the time. There are some, but not all of them were that heavy. And the FM Records, a lot of the bands on that, AOR, hard rock, hair metal type bands. But anyway, I'll show you what I have got. So not as much as Music for Nations. I've got probably more Music for Nations, but it's also too a little bit similar to Music for Nations in the sense that I do have some records that were released on FM Records or HM Records, but the version I've got is on a different label, so I'm not going to show those. Like for example, Magnum did get a release on FM Records, but my copy is a Polydor release. So just like Music for Nations, sometimes they had things released on other labels. Like I talked about Tiger Tales. That was released on Music for Nations, but the copy I had was a Combat Records release. So I'm not going to show that. I've got a Di'Anno one as well. Poor Di'Anno, his debut solo, that was released on FM Records, but the one I've got is a Japanese press, so it's on a different label. So I'm not going to show those ones. So I'm just going to show you the ones that have either the FM Records or HM Records logo on the back. So let's get into it. So the first one is a UK band called After Hours. Take Off. And yeah, look, there's the band on the front, and it pretty much sounds like what you might think by looking at the band. 80s hard rock. Pretty good, actually. Love Attack, that's a good song. It's a bit hit and miss, but I quite enjoy it. There is a second album as well, which interestingly enough they call After Hours, featuring John Francis, even though John Francis is the vocalist on this album as well. I'm not sure why they are sort of needing to make a big deal of that. But anyway, that only had a CD release, no vinyl release. It was 1992. But it's also worth checking out. I've heard it. I don't have a physical copy. But yeah, this is pretty good. The vocalist, John Francis, he is now in a band called Edge of the Blade. And they've actually done 4 albums over the last sort of 10 years or so. So he's still sort of active. And the drummer in that band is the drummer from Shy. So, and they sound pretty good too. So quite a similar sort of a sound. So yeah, worth checking out. That's Edge of the Blade. Right, moving on. A similar band to After Hours. It was also on the FM Records label, and I talked about this band last week, Tobruk and Pleasure and Pain's their second album. So they put out 2 albums. I think their first one was on a more of a major label, but this one's on FM Records, and it's very hard to see, but you can see the FM Records label down there. And then even harder to see, I can't even really even see it, and I'm looking right at it. But just on the side of the FM Records, it then does say Revolver. Okay, so that you know it's Revolver Records, and then underneath that is FM Records. Or sometimes we'll say Revolver, and then underneath that it's HM Records or Heavy Metal Records. So that's like the parent company. But yeah, so Tobruk, Pleasure and Pain, this is their final album. I talked about this album but last week. Well, I talked about the album cover anyway. I didn't really like the album cover because you can barely see the model on the front there. You can see here a little bit better on the back. But one thing I didn't talk about was the vocalist. Now, the vocalist is a guy he's just called Snake. But his name's actually Stuart, and he died in the early 2000s. He was only 42. So I think he had a heart problem, but so that's a shame. But I can also tell you that the drummer. Now, where's the drummer here? Yeah, so Eddie, the drummer Eddie here, he then goes on and joins a really good band. Again, quite a similar sort of a sound. He joins Midnight Blue on drums, and there's the band here on the back. I think I may have shown this EP before. It's 3 tracks, I think, is all that's on it. But Surrender is a very good song. But yeah, he's the drummer. Eddie's the drummer on this one. He's come from Tobruk. And this came out, I think, around 89, something like that. They probably were gearing up to release an album, but it ended up not happening until later on. They did release, I think there's a compilation of songs that they had that's been released later on, but never got to do an album, I guess, because, the musical landscape was about to change in a couple of years. But check out the song Surrender. That's really good. But yeah, so that's what happened with the drummer from Tobruk. I don't know about too many. I don't think too much else happened with the rest, but it's a good band worth checking out. And so, so there's a couple of bands from FM Records. Here's some more. Now, this is, so actually this one, now we're heading over to Heavy Metal Records. So interesting enough, this one's a Heavy Metal Records. And this is actually no heavier, though, than Tobruk or After Hours. In fact, maybe even less heavy. This is a band called Pet Hate. But this is early, fairly early, I guess, in the label. It's 84. This is called Bad Publicity. What's interesting is they released 2 albums in the same year. So this came out in 1984. And then The Bride Wore Red also came out in 1984. Okay, both on Heavy Metal Records. They're not using the normal logo here. They've got that you see quite often, and even on this one, it's slightly different. Maybe they haven't quite settled on it yet. I'm not sure. So they did sometimes have different logos. There's a some more classic one, that one there. But yeah, it's I really like that band actually. They only did the 2 albums. There's also some like 12-inch singles as well, which have extra tracks on it that aren't on the album worth checking out. If you kind of like that sort of, it's definitely not metal. It's sort of like quite sleazy, sort of hard rock. It's 84, so it's sort of pre-hair metal, but it would pretty much be what we would call hair metal now. So yeah, it's not polished. It's not really well produced or anything like that. But it's quite catchy music actually, and I quite enjoy both those albums. So worth checking out. The vocalist actually, Alistair Terry, so the vocalist from Pet Hate, he in 85 then does his own solo album, which is also I think on Heavy Metal Records label. I don't have a physical copy of it, but he does his own solo album. But yeah, then that's it. And actually, most of the band, if you know a band called Silverwing, that's pretty much what this band is. There was a band called Silverwing, and then that became Pet Hate. All right, next one. Like I said, these are in no particular order, just anything that's FM Records or HM Records in my collection I'm going to show. This is Karen Lawrence, and this is called Rip and Tear. Now, usually the logo is very clear and obvious on the back cover. So you can tell it's HM Records or FM Records. It's not very obvious on this one. But you can see here that it says 1986 FM/Revolver Records. Now, Karen Lawrence is really interesting, and I haven't showed this album before. I'm going to show it on my next female-fronted episode because I haven't talked about her. Fantastic vocalist. She was actually in the band 1994, who put out a couple of albums in the late 70s. Really good stuff too. And this album's a bit of a sort of you might not know about it, right? Because again, one of the things too with female-fronted, you might look at this and not realize this is hard rock. This is good 80s hard rock. I guess it's similar to Pat Benatar, that sort of thing. So it's not super heavy or anything, but it rocks. And she's got a great voice, and really worth checking out. So I kind of only discovered this fairly recently after discovering how good 1994 sounded. So, but I'll reserve talking about this until I maybe when I do my next female-fronted episode, because I haven't mentioned her on that yet. And I'll talk about 1994 as well, the band. All right, next one, a band called Money. Now, this is called Trust Me. Now, what's interesting about this is that they actually released this album a couple of years earlier on a different label, and it had a different album cover. I think it was also called Trust Me. And then, but what's really bizarre is they had also released another album with the same record, with the same album cover, also called Trust Me. So there's like 3 albums that have Trust Me as the album cover, or as the album title. And the first 2, not this one, but the first 2, have completely different songs on them. So I might be confusing you might be, but check them out. So their first album is the same album title, same album cover as their second one, but it has completely different songs on it. And then those songs, the one on the second album, is then also on this one as well, that they release on Heavy Metal America. So this one's actually Heavy Metal America. I guess because they're an American band. This is a band from New Jersey. So I'm assuming maybe that's how that worked out. I'm not exactly sure. But to be honest, I've given it a good shot and not loving it, I've got to say. But I do like the song Can't Happen. That's pretty good. But some of the lyrics are a little bit repetitive, and I just think could have been better. But you can see by looking at them, the kind of sound that they've got, the image they've got. And they do release another album as well after this, independently, I think. But I don't have a physical copy or anything of it. But anyway, that's Money and Trust Me. All right, next one, a band called Tradia, I think is how you say it, and Trade Winds. This is actually another American band, and although interesting enough, although they're American, it's on the FM Records label. They've been compared to Journey, I guess, and that's probably a fairly good comparison. I'd also compare it a little bit to Survivor. Some of these, especially some of the heavier songs, sound like some of the heavier sort of Survivor songs. But Journey's a good comparison as well. So it's not super heavy, but I really like it. Good vocalist on here. Good, some nice guitar riffs on here as well. I do prefer the heavier songs when they sort of lighten up their sound. It's not so interesting to me. Now they've actually done 2 more albums after. They did one more album after this, and then they've kind of got a sort of leftovers sort of album. They call it the Basement Tapes or something like that. So it's their 3rd album. But on their 2nd album, which was released, I think, in the mid-90s, so a bit of time after this one came out in 1988, and so it's the only thing on vinyl from them. But their 2nd album came out mid-90s. I think it might have been songs they were working on for their next album, and it's got a different vocalist, although the vocalist on here, Johnny Lindsay, he does appear on their 2nd album on like 2 or 3 songs, so maybe he started doing some songs for the next album, and then they replaced vocalists. But the 2nd album, I haven't got a physical copy. It's similar, not quite as good production, but similar. They might have just been demos. But But yeah, I enjoy this. It's like I say, you know, I don't like the slow songs so much, but the heavier songs are really good. Worth checking out. If you're going to check out a song, Never Gonna Go and Let's Not Turn Love Away, basically the first two songs are really good. I like those ones. Now, this is a band I've talked about before on my channel, Heavy Petting and Big Bang. So this one is an FM Records release. You can see the logo there, revolver going down the side. And yeah, of course, this is their third album. I have a feeling when this gets released on FM Records, this is 1989, they've actually already split up. And it's, of course, they've got back together now, or recently they got back together again. But yeah, and there are releases as well, compilations of leftover tracks that got released later on. But this is probably be my least favorite of their three albums. But there are some good songs on here. Don't Call It Love, I quite like. But yeah, I know Dan from Off the Charts actually really likes this one. So yeah, it's definitely nothing wrong with it. I think one of the problems for them is the song Romeo, they entered it in that Euro competition, that Eurovision or whatever it's called, something like that. And I think they lost a little bit of credibility doing that, and that's quite a sort of not a heavy song at all. I guess they got a little bit too pop. And also the vocalist is maybe a bit of an acquired taste. I like him, but I know, in fact, talking about Dan likes this album, but he doesn't like his vocals on Rock Ain't Dead so much. His vocals are a little bit, doesn't quite enjoy them quite so much. And I think that his vocals are definitely more obvious on the Rock Ain't Dead. But for me, Rock Ain't Dead is a great album, and it's my favourite Heavy Petting. But there we go. All right, so moving on. So I think this one here, this is Sabu and Heartbreak. Now this is Heavy Metal America. So this is one of the more classic sort of logos that they use. So it's got the eagle, Heavy Metal, and then America. And yeah, Paul Sabu, I mean, he goes on to form Only Child after this, but he's pretty well known as a producer. He even worked with Shania Twain and did some production and songwriting for her, I think, before she kind of broke big. But check out the song Angeline if you've never heard that song. That's really good. New Girl in Town as well is very good. This guy here, Charles, he goes on. He stays with Paul Sabu and is in Only Child as well. Yeah, Heavy Metal America, that one's on. Now, this is an interesting one. This is a band called Rune Staff. Now, I have talked about this band before when I did a female-fronted episode. But interesting cover art, because you look at this and have no idea what kind of music it is. The back doesn't help at all either. But you can, of course, see the Heavy Metal Records logo down here. So, and again, like I'm saying, you know, I said before, even though it's on Heavy Metal Records, doesn't mean this is a super heavy album. It's not at all. It's very much sort of female-fronted hard rock, but very melodic. But I really like it. I can imagine some people might see, oh, Heavy Metal Records, okay, and then put it on and be a little bit disappointed it's not that heavy. But yeah, for me, it's really good. I have talked about this album before, so I won't talk too much more about it. But good female-fronted hard rock from sort of mid-'80s. Next band, this one, FM Records. So it's interesting because I look at the band and the album, and I don't have really, unless I've remembered, I have no idea if it's FM Records or Heavy Metal Records. It's not, you can't just judge it on the music and by looking at it. So this one happens to be FM Records. I guess it makes sense. This is very much, you know, AOR hard rock type of sound. Fashioned by passion. This one probably could have made my bad album covers, or least favorite album covers episode I did last week. Now there again, and this is another one too. It has an alternative album cover which is better. I just feel this is not necessarily obvious what type of music it is. But anyway, that's not what this show's about. But yeah, so Fashioned by Passion, this is their second album, and this is actually their final album before they don't break up. They change their name. They become a band called Tattoo Rodeo. But yeah, it's pretty good actually. I mean, it's not great. This is 85 or 86, yeah, when this comes out. But there are some good songs. It's not too heavy. Yeah, if you like Jafria, they kind of remind me of Jafria a little bit. Yeah, so it's on FM Records. Another band I talked about on one of my female-fronted episodes, and it's just a one and done. In fact, this is not even a full album. This is Legal Limits, and Cover Girl is the name of it. So a mini album. They've only got 5 songs on it, and it's pretty average, to be honest with you. It's on FM Records, 86 release, but I do like the song Cover Girl, which, interestingly enough, is a cover song, but that's a good song. I enjoy that one. That's pretty much my go-to song if I play anything from this album. Another band I've talked about quite a bit, Reckless, Heart of Steel. I think they're a Canadian band. I've talked before about how this is their second album. They've got a new vocalist. They've got a male vocalist. Previously, they'd had a female vocalist. But yeah, this is on Heavy Metal America. And this makes a bit more sense that it's on a heavy metal record label. Well, the record label's called Heavy Metal, because this would be what I would call, your standard sort of 80s heavy metal. Hot and Ready, Heart of Steel. Good stuff. But it's not super heavy. It's got some good melodic, good melodies in there as well. I really like this album. Hot and Ready, Heart of Steel especially, two of my favourites. But the previous album is good as well. This is Steve Madden. He's really the guy who runs the show, I think. But so there we go. Heavy Metal America, Heavy Metal Records, and it's got like an English address here, England address and telephone number. So although they're putting America, it's still, their base of operations, I guess, is still England. But I'm not sure if the America thing is because we're from America. I'm not sure how they differentiated on that one. Now, this one here, this will be an interesting one. What's this one? Yeah, FM. So this is actually FM Records. This is Gesher and Phantasmagoria. So I love this album, but it's not even really a full-length album. So it's only got 6 songs, but fantastic, really good stuff. And it's interesting that this one says FM Records, but then it also says Heavy Metal Records Worldwide up here. So it's, I'm not quite sure. Maybe they couldn't quite make up their mind. I don't know how that happens, but it's got both on it. Of course, they're all, doesn't really matter. It all sort of lives under the Revolver Records, I guess, label. But I guess if I open up the record, look at the record, so you can see there it's got Heavy Metal Worldwide on it. Didn't really see that very much. The worldwide part of it, so I'm not quite sure what that means. But anyway, Geisha, really good. There's only 6 songs on there, but it's really good. And you can hear, they did do other songs, and you can hear it on a sort of a, after they'd broken up, sort of a compilation type thing where there's a whole album's worth of songs on there. And that's pretty much it. I've just finished with, I've got, like most labels, they released compilation albums as well, which is a good way to kind of advertise the bands that you have on your label. So this is FM Records label, and you can see they've got Magnum. So they did have Magnum, White Sister, State Trooper, Excess, Moldy Story, Joshua, Karen Lawrence, so I showed Dark Star, Jack Green, and Sabu. So some of those I've already shown, but they're on here. Yeah, this is 87 release. So that's just, I get, advertising the artists that are on the FM Records label. They also released Hot Night in the City. Now, this features a whole lot of bands that aren't necessarily on their label. So it's got the FM Records label there, but I think a lot of these bands are independent bands, haven't perhaps even been signed to a label yet. But, so they released that. And another similar one to that is Metal Hammer, Best of British Steel, FM Records label on the back, but not necessarily all these bands were released on FM Records. Yeah, it does have After Hours on it. It's even got Midnight Blue here when their great song Surrender. And Lisa Dominique, I know she was on FM Records, but not all of them. Yeah, Wrathchild as well, they were on FM Records, I think. But yeah, I don't think all of them were, but a lot of independent bands on here. Really good compilation, actually. It's worth checking out. It's 2 LP, and you can see all the different bands it's got on it. But so there we go. So yeah, there's lots of other bands and records as well on that label. But yeah, this is just what I've got from my collection. that had either FM Records or Heavy Metal Records on as the label for them. All right, I hope you found that interesting. I'll be back very soon with some more content. Hit the thumbs up if you've enjoyed it. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and I'll catch you later. All right, see ya.